R3.9 billion rand has been allocated to the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies for the 2024-2025 financial year. This was revealed by new Minister for Communication and Digital Technologies, Malatsi, during the budget vote yesterday in Cape Town. 1.6 billion rand was allocated for ICT enterprise development and SOE oversight, to ensure the monitoring of the South African Police, the South African Post Office, and a business rescue plan, the SABC strategy, as well as ICASA's regulatory compliance operations. Let's now unpack the budget this morning with the Minister himself, Malatsi, who's now joining us via video link from Cape Town. Minister, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Maybe just for purposes of clarification, it's been close to a month now since the appointment as Minister of Communications. There is already a budget in place. Just so that people understand how budget allocations actually work, can you just give us an explanation around that?
Good morning, Aldrin, and to all your viewers. It's a pleasure to always be on your shows. Yeah, I mean, basically, this is, the culmination of the budget cycle in which allocations are made to respective departments to then fund, their respective programs. And that budget allocation is part of, the broader allocations that was done through the medium-term strategic framework, which allocates resources over a 5-year period for government departments. So obviously, as you said, this has been approximately 3 weeks into the job. So a lot of what is reflected in the budget is through work that has been done, by my predecessors and the department. The key thing to take away from the budget, apart from that 3.9 allocation, is the amount that is being allocated to SOEs. So the department has 11 state-owned enterprises ranging from the SABC Office Post Bank, including ICASA, and that is where the allocation of the 1.6 billion goes into, because some of them, while they generate income, but they are largely reliant on what they get from the taxpayer through us.
Okay. With that said as well, especially with the SOEs, the decision, of course, was taken before the elections that we won't have a public enterprises ministry after the elections, and that function has now moved to the ministry in the presidency. When it comes to the SOEs that fall under the communications department, does that mean that those SOEs will remain there and they will not be moving under the auspice of this new holding entity that will house some of the SOEs that are state-owned?
Yes, fortunately, the SOEs that have always fall under the department have remained. And I think what was happening with the restructuring of those that fell under the Department of Public Enterprises was since the demolition, to use that word, of that department, was that they would be in the presidency. But for us, the entities that were here in the previous administration continue to remain. In fact, the ongoing debate that has been taking place in the past years has been about rationalization of the state entities, because there is a sense that you could merge some of the entities or group them together for more efficiency and as part of trimming the size of the public service. But yeah, we weren't affected by that.
Okay, let's speak about the South African Post Office. It is under business rescue. As it stands currently, Minister, do you think that there is any chance at all to save around 5,000 jobs at that post office?
Look, I mean, that is something that we are going to be looking at. I think when you look at the progress that the business rescue is making, even though it's slow, it's steady, there is hope that you can salvage some jobs in there. The bigger question, Aldrin, about the post office has to look at, one, the form of ownership and a possible restructuring in there, that you still maintain state ownership, but open it up for some level of private-public partnerships in order to achieve two things. One, it is in a space that is highly competitive, in a space that has evolved and moved towards e-commerce, but there is still scope for a state postal and telecommunications courier services, because the post office has one of the largest footprints in the country in terms of accessibility, even in the most remote areas. But you gotta then move towards a space that it is financially sustainable and it is not wholly dependent on a large chunk of taxpayers' money, and that it can generate its own revenue. And the sense that we are getting, and at least that I've got from the briefings and the interactions with the colleagues around, is there is some steady process. And I'm hoping that beyond the business rescue period, we'll then start it being repositioned in such a way that it can be financially viable, because the market still exists for the post office to thrive. We just have to make sure that it is fully capacitated and accessible. And that is a difficulty, because even as you evolve, take into consideration the technological developments that have happened in this space of the postal and courier services, it means that there will possibly be some job reductions in the state. But if we can have a post office that the most vulnerable members of our society can rely on, as they have previously in the past, I think the benefits of it would be far more larger in the economy.
Yeah. Does this mean that the minister will be making the proposal to cabinet that post the business rescue process, let's go out to market and find an equity partner?
Look, the discussion, the considerations are already there. I think the most important thing is going to be, as the Government of National Unity finalizes its policy priorities in terms of repositioning of state-owned enterprises and balancing it off with this reality that exists, Adrian, that the fiscus is not going to be able to afford bailouts to state-owned enterprises, because when that happens, you are taking away monies that could be allocated to social services that people need on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, we will use the forums within the Government of National Unity to present any considerations about the future structure of ownership on the post office. But that is the obvious consideration. If you want the post office to be competitive, if you want the post office to thrive, we really have to look at how that model of ownership can be relevant in this time and space and in the market that it functions in.
Yeah. I wonder whether that could then also mean that this could be a precursor to actually privatizing the post office in its entirety. And I'll tell you why I'm making this asking this question is also in relation to earlier this year, the DA issued the Connecting South Africa for Development Growth paper, DA policy on information and communication technology. And I want to take the example of Telkom, for instance. And the DA is saying that the Telkom shares that are owned by the state should be sold off. Wouldn't the same thing then happen with the post office if you were to bring in an equity partner, but then intention is to eventually have it totally privatized?
Yeah, look, I think we need to be cautious of making those predictions. The reality is that we are in a government of national unity, Aldrin, and what it's gonna mean is that there will be all these considerations that may reflect previous policy positions of different parties, including my own party, right? But the key thing here in a government of national unity is there's gonna be compromises, there's gonna be alignment, and we are going to be using the channels in there. And it would be slightly reckless on my part to speculate in terms of what the eventuality would be. But I'm saying to you now that even when you engage, the Minister of Finance, or you engage predecessors on this particular matter, there is a recognition and realization that any effort to make and reposition the post office to be financially sustainable, to be competitive in this market, will lead to re-looking at that structure of ownership. And that means that there is scope for a public-private partnership, but it has to carry the support of cabinet, and it has to ultimately then be ratified by the president. But I think there is scope for that, because we gotta look at ways of relieving pressure on the national fiscus And that pressure is currently being even exerted by bailouts for state-owned enterprises that are not really profitable.
Yeah, on that very same document, and again emphasizing that this is a DA document, it's not a government document, and as you've been emphasizing as well, that you're not necessarily pursuing a DA policy, but it is the Democratic Alliance and being part of the Democratic Alliance that has made you being part of the GNU as well as its executive. So that document also speaks about going to the public and asking the public whether we still need the SABC. As the minister, is that something that you think that the country should still be pursuing so that we get something definitive out of that?
Look, I mean, and I understand why you are getting into that terrain, because you can't divorce the fact that, you know, I come from the DA, and we've made previous pronouncement in terms of what our policy preferences are. But where I am right now, I have to work with what the current law says in terms of that structure of ownership, right? And what we'll be doing, Adrian, is that, you know, with the SABC bill, for instance, there's already input that has been previously made by different stakeholders. The DA has also made its position known through its own submission in there. And ultimately, in our considerations, that what we will assess. But I think it will be slightly naughty to imply that on the basis of the DA's previous policy preferences on this, automatically the current Minister of Telecommunications will do this, because we have to do and take decisions that are also supported by GNU partners. And that is where the final determination of policy is. And there is an important clause in the statement of intent which speaks, you know, sufficient consensus on major policy aspect. And you can imagine that this will be, you know, one of those issues that will then be determined at that level.
Yeah. So what a sufficient consensus also tells us is that there will be a divergence of views on the table, which means that the DA can come with a different proposal. So my question again is the DA still going to pursue the question around whether the SABC is still relevant, whether the country still needs a public broadcaster? This is now outside of what the law says, because what policy proposals are as well is also with the intention to amend certain legislation. You've now spoken about the bill that the DA has commented on as well. So I'm asking it on that basis, not to say that this is what the minister is saying. The minister is saying that we no longer need the SABC, but I'm asking that from a party's perspective, is this something that you're still willing to pursue and try to convince the other GNU members?
Well, you know, the DA's policy preferences will always remain, and it is something that, as I said to you earlier, we will ventilate in those structures. What I was just cautioning against, Adrian, is, you know, to have this conclusive predetermination that it will automatically happen because this is what you previously said, and be mindful of, you know, the difficulties or the challenges that emerge with being in a government with other parties, where there's gotta be, you know, support to your policy preferences, and that has to be juxtaposed with the policy policy priorities that the administration will be setting. And I'm saying to you, I'm comfortable, you know, ventilating these options first throughout those structures. And if they succeed, you know, we'll always come back to your show and say, well, this effort succeeded on these policy preferences. And if they don't, we are mature enough to understand that we got into this arrangement with the knowledge that there will be policy compromises, and then there will be policy alignment. And what has brought us together is that on the major issues, we agree. So on the others that we don't find agreement on, we'll just have to be big boys and big girls and get on with the job.
Just a final one in conclusion. The MK party taking the SABC to court over them using the term Government of National Unity. As a member of the Government of National Unity, do you think that this group that has come together, various political party, actually meet the criteria of the definition of Government of National Unity?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the political parties that have formed the Government of National Unity, they are a vast majority of parties that are also reflected in Parliament. And I mean, every organization, every individual can have their own interpretation of what the composition of this government is. The MK is obviously entitled to pursue, the cause to seek any justice that they do. And I think they will find that the SABC is more than capable of defending itself. One of the things that I'm very determined in doing is, making very clear the separation in terms of executive involvement in the operations of the SABC, and it also maintaining its editorial independence. And also because I've got confidence in the leadership that is there currently in the CEO and also the board chairperson, and the early signs that are emerging there in terms of just the running and the managing of the institution give me comfort in these early days. The MK must do what they think will best clear any concerns that they have, and that's why we have courts in this case in this country. I mean.
Thank you so much for your time. That is the new Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies there, Malatsi.